and play a guitar and sing to audiences, and don't get too excited. Nothing was big time. Everything was small time. It was bars. It was coffee houses. Once in a while, it was a college. But let me tell you a little bit about the bars, more so than any of the other ones. When you play a bar and you're standing there with a guitar and you're singing a song that you've sung 100 or more times already, you're not really thinking about the song. You're not really thinking about what your fingers are doing or what your voice is doing. What you're doing is you're listening to the people in the bar. You're actually being entertained by them while they're supposedly being entertained by you. Mm-hmm. And they're not usually looking at you. They're usually talking to each other. And I have more than one story, but I'm going to tell you one. This was the guy who would come into this bar in Hempstead, New York. It was a Holiday Inn lounge. And I would hear him, and a woman would come to the table, and apparently they had arranged to meet, and it's a date, and he's telling her he's an astronaut. And I'm going, oh, wow, he's an astronaut. Holy cow. What do I know? I mean, what if he's famous? I don't recognize him, actually, you know? And so another day I was up there, and I could actually hear what they were saying, even though I'm singing. You would think I couldn't hear, right? But I could hear everything. Next day, he's a police officer. It's like, holy cow, this guy's everything. Yeah. Well, I guess you get the picture. The guy was lying to these girls, right?
Yeah.
And, as you get older, you start to realize, a lot of people lie to each other, and especially when it comes to trying to get to know one another. And I always thought, gosh, the best thing to do is to be honest. If they don't like me, then I guess they don't like me. Intimate Lies and the Law is the title of the book, written by Elaine Hasday. Am I saying her name right, Robin? Mm-hmm. She's an attorney. And so she's got some interesting insight into the other side of being lied to. And when I was reading the synopsis of the book, I was thinking, oh my gosh, I know this guy. I know who she's talking about. Not really, but it just sounds like it. She is a distinguished McKnight University professor, a centennial professor of law at the University of Minnesota Law School. And again, the book is called Intimate Lies and the Law. This is not fiction, but a lot of fiction is based on this kind of stuff. Jill, Elaine Hasday. Good morning, Jill.
Hi.
Where are you?
Thanks for having me.
Where are you calling from?
I live in Minneapolis.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you for being on the air with us today. So, do you represent mostly women?
So I'm a professor, so I'm not a lawyer for people who are deceived. But this book is about deception in dating, sex, marriage, and family life, and how the law responds to it.
Okay.
One question people sometimes have is, are women deceived more often than men? And I can't say that definitively. I think people assume women are deceived more often than men, but actually women also practice a lot of deceit.
I believe that.
Okay. I've seen that, but what about once the I do's are said, once in the marriage, do things change for us? I mean, I'm asking you to be a psychologist more than a professor or attorney.
Well, people always, one question people ask me when I worked on this book is, what kinds of intimate deception surprised you most? And at this point, literally nothing surprises me. Anything you can imagine, anything people care about. So, for instance, what men and women lie about tends to be different. So men are more likely to lie about they have a fancy job. That was your example from the bar. Or they make more money. Classic, obviously, female lie is lies around pregnancy. But people, whatever matters to people in the relationship or to get into a relationship is what people deceive each other about.
Right, including whether or not you like their lasagna, right?
Yeah, and actually, one thing I say in the book is, if it's a deception that the deceived person thinks is in their interest, I don't have a problem with that, and that doesn't produce lawsuits. So, for instance, if anyone wants to deceive me by telling me they love my book, I'm happy to hear that, and that makes me feel great.
Okay.
I'm writing about deceptions where when the deceived person finds out about it, they've experienced injury, and they're not happy about it.
Now, emotional injury.
Right, now, you're talking about people
or financial injury or physical injury.
People who are intimate with one another, and so far we're kind of thinking in terms of people who really know each other, really have a real relationship. But there are other stories we hear about in the news about, and I'm going to say guys, but it could be girls too, ladies, but guys who get on the internet and fall in love with somebody electronically, and that person is really falling in love, but this guy's just out to get some money. And next thing you know, he's telling her his grandmother is sick and he needs money, and she's sending him a check. So there's...
Oh, yeah,
that's a good one, right?
Right. Well, so first, right, romance scams are a very robust source of crime, and like the FBI has, it's hundreds of millions of dollars every year. But what's interesting is sometimes courts will define. So the general bottom line is that if it's an intimate relationship, courts don't want to give remedies, and they define intimacy very broadly. So I have a case in the book. This woman connects with this man on this internet chat room, and over almost 2 years, they have endless interactions. She sends him more than $10,000 in gifts. She eventually discovers that the man she's been exchanging phone calls and emails with doesn't exist. And she alleges he's a figment of the imagination of this woman named Janice St. James. Paul Bonham sues Janice St. James for fraudulent misrepresentation, and the Illinois Supreme Court says you can't sue because you're suing an intimate. So two things are interesting. One is this idea you can't sue your intimate, you can't access ordinary remedies for deception, but also courts define intimacy broadly enough to cover two people who really never met.
Oh, my.
Wow.
Oh, my.
So the word intimate is an interesting word because you're intimate with everybody you're close to, not just the person you have a relationship with. Well, they're all relationships,
right.
But you know what I mean, a romantic relationship.
Right, and well, okay, so one is courts define intimacy very broadly. If you went on a date once, if you had sex once, they consider you an intimate, even though you actually may not know each other well, and that's why the deception was so easy, right? They didn't know you weren't an astronaut. But my book also covers, outside of like the romance, sex, marriage context, I also talk about deception in family relationships, like between parents and children or siblings. Any person you have a relationship with could be a site of deception.
So is it, something you could take to court? Could a woman take a guy to court if he deceived her into thinking he was actually interested in her, but the truth is all he wanted was sex? They have sex. He says, I didn't really have any interest in you anyway, confesses that he just did it for the sex. Can she sue him now because of that?
So, there's a tort that's called battery, which is basically touching someone without their consent. And the ordinary rule for battery is it doesn't count as consent if you were deceived into saying yes, right? Just like if you were tricked into signing a contract, it doesn't count as consent. So some women have attempted to sue for battery. I wouldn't have had sex with you if I had known. And usually it's actually not so amorphous as you pretended to like me. It's like you hid you already married. You had an STD. It's these very big things.
Yeah, that's big.
And they're big. And courts basically won't let them sue for battery, even though the case is going up on the assumption they would not have consented, right?
Wow.
So the push in my book is, I think, even if you were deceived by an intimate, you should have access to the ordinary remedies the law makes available. So if you could ordinarily bring a battery suit, you should be able to go forward, go to the jury and convince the jury that you wouldn't have consented but for this.
In that particular type of a case, and I'm asking you to, I guess, give an opinion that may not be popular, but still, what is your thought on this? Do you think the women are more likely to get the sympathy or empathy of the court than the men would? Because we have this reputation, us guys.
Oh, yeah. I mean, right. Of course, gender, runs through it, right? So I think there is a presumption that, for any man to have sex, that's like he's just a lucky duck. He can't
right.
There's no injury there. So I think that's true. But even when it's a woman who's deceived, courts are just very unsympathetic, even though they say, I agree, you wouldn't have had sex with that person. That person tricked you. I mean, I think one of the things that's interesting about the book is, as your story in the bar suggests, deception is so common in dating and romance. And for me, what's interesting is courts say that, and then their reaction is, okay, and we shouldn't try to change that in any way. I'm not saying it would be easy, but what's interesting to me is like the law just doesn't push against that. They say, of course people lie to get you to have sex with them.
Mm-hmm.
We're not changing that. It's interesting because in general, if people lie to get you to do something.
So, and you had said before about intimacy between parents and children. What are some of those cases?
Okay, so what's interesting is if you're a parent who deceives their child, so sometimes it's like financial, you're managing a trust for them and you embezzle it, or but it also might be you deceive them to conceal that they're adopted, or you deceive them to conceal they have a health problem. that you consider stigmatic, like they're born intersex or something. In general, courts are very sympathetic to parents. They treat it essentially as a parental prerogative. You have a parent's right to deceive. But what's interesting is they do that even when the child is already a legal adult. So normally your parent doesn't have legal control over you once you reach 18. But in the deception context, the courts act like a parent has a right to deceive you forever. In contrast, if you're a kid and you deceive your parent, courts come down on you. They are not sympathetic.
Oh, really? Have you, in all of your studies and research or just plain experience, have you had any that were like really far out there? Like, let's say a child sues his parents because they told them about Santa Claus? I mean,
oh, no. Yeah. I mean, what's interesting is I think people have a tendency to think about like the most marginal case. That's not what brings people to sue. I mean, suing is expensive. You need to get a lawyer. Mm-hmm. You can't collect money unless you have damages. You need to be suing someone who has enough money to pay a damage award. So I just don't anticipate I would like plaintiffs to have more chance of success, but I actually don't anticipate a wave of litigation. It is embarrassing. We're also in a culture where it's embarrassing to reveal that you've been duped, right?
Yeah.
Everyone wants to believe that only happens to the stupid. One lesson I want to say is it doesn't matter how smart you are, you can be fooled.
Do you know, I know this is probably not in line directly with what your book is about, but I think in general, looking at the human experience and understanding that this is part of the human experience, one of the things, and I'm not trying to bring religion into this topic so much, but just one of the ethical things we teach our children, whether it's using religion as that vehicle or just simply trying to tell them what's the best thing to do. The whole honesty is the best policy thinking. Who did that? Benjamin Franklin? Whoever said that. I just think, I mean, if I were going to teach my son how to be happy, I would say don't ever deceive somebody you love. Never, ever. If you're going home and your wife is making dinner and you go through the drive-thru at McDonald's and you eat a hamburger and she says, "Did you eat?" Say yes. Don't say no.
Right. I agree. I don't think deception is a good policy. It's one of the interesting things that I was thinking about as I wrote the book is, why would someone deceive about something so big when it's going to come out? You know, and I think that there's a few motivations. So one is people tell themselves it won't come out, which depending on the deception could be more or less plausible. So for instance, some people will falsely present themselves as never married when actually they were divorced. If that ex-wife never shows up, they might get away with it.
Yeah.
But I think also another story people tell themselves is once she gets to know me, she won't care about the deception. So I talk about this guy, he wrote a dating guide. In the dating guide, he admits he deceived women to conceal that he was a smoker. But he tells himself, once they realize how fabulous I am, they just won't care.
Oh
my
you know,
gosh.
Rationalization is a denial is a river in Egypt.
And there's another one too, and this maybe I know this because I'm a guy and I hang out with guys. But just for the listener's sake, my right hand on the Bible. I never did this, but they would say things in remote places, like somebody coming to Florida, for example, doesn't live here, so he will make some kind of a statement to a woman just to get her to like him or whatever. And then I will say, "Why'd you say that?" And I will get in return, "Well, I'm never going to see her again."
Mm-hmm.
So
right, and I mean, and I'm not that interested, to be honest, in two people, they have a conversation and there's some lies exchanged, because there's not much injury or damage there. But it is interesting how routinized deception is. And that's actually one thing courts will sometimes say. They invoke like barnyard analogies. They'll say, just like the rooster preening in the barnyard, men will put their best foot forward. But the things they're saying for best foot, it's not like you shaved and showered. It's like you claim to have a job you don't have. It's huge things about your life.
What about that? What about the deception that is used to get a job? I can tell you some stories about that too.
Right. So obviously there's a lot of deception outside of intimacy. And one kind of intimate deception I call deception to maintain a pre-existing facade. So an example would be you've told your boss that you have a PhD, and then so you have to tell your wife the same thing because otherwise the secret might get out. And that's also a robust source of intimate deception. You're telling someone else or everyone else some deceit, and you have to tell your intimates to kind of keep the story.
Does the law sometimes side with the person that is doing the deceiving and thereby calling the person who is deceived stupid and they should have known better?
Generally, the law sides with deceivers. Generally. So one thing courts say routinely is, it's your fault you didn't investigate. And you can see why that's psychologically appealing. We want to believe that only the particularly stupid and gullible can be fooled, because then it's not us, right? Also, in hindsight, everything seems more obvious. Now that we know he's not a doctor, we ask, well, why didn't you ask to see his diplomas, right? But in fact, there's overwhelming evidence that detecting deception is extremely difficult, even for people of above average shrewdness and sophistication. First, most of us are much less good at detecting deceit than we think we are, and detecting an intimate deception can be even more difficult because we trust them. They're telling us what we want to hear. Also, there's social norms against investigating. We're supposed to trust our intimates, not investigate. Plus, if you try to investigate, the investigation can itself end the relationship because the person finds out about it. If you search through someone's garbage or follow them, they may spot you. Mm-hmm. And there's also laws. You're not just allowed to go through someone's credit reports or tax returns or emails. There's laws against that for good reason. So one irony is that courts tend to blame people for being deceived, but the law itself makes detecting deception more difficult.
Now, how do the people that are here illegally, how do they deceive? Like if a woman is here illegally, how does she deceive the man by marrying him and then going through the process?
Okay. So one form of intimate deception I talk about is what I call gateway deception. So that's you're deceiving someone because marriage is a route to legal rights and responsibilities that are privileges that aren't otherwise available. So the vast majority of sham marriages involving immigration both people are in on it. They're in cahoots. But there are some cases where a citizen thinks they're in a genuine marriage and they're deceived by someone who wants the immigration benefits. There's also cases. Social Security, you can get spousal benefits, so you could marry someone and you're hiding that you're only marrying them for access to Social Security or access to their veterans benefits. Anytime there's some benefit to be gained, intimate deception is a possibility. So one of the bottom lines of my book is, it's not surprising, but just to say that intimate deception, one motivation is that the benefits from it can be enormous. So it's in some ways it's not surprising that it's so pervasive because you can gain so much.
Wow. The book is currently #1 in the litigation category on Amazon. It is titled, if you're just tuning in, Intimate Lies and the Law, and it is written by our guest. And I didn't even ask you if I pronounced your name correctly. Jill? Go ahead.
Jill Hasday.
Hasday. Okay, Jill Elaine Hasday. I'm trying to imagine the person who is walking through the bookstore, sees the title, and picks it up. I'm imagining that this is a lady. And I'm also imagining that she has already kicked some guy out of her life who completely disappointed her in one way or another by deceiving her, and maybe even to the tune of thousands of dollars. Am I right? Is that who's typically picking up the book?
This book is for anyone who's ever committed, experienced, or gossiped about intimate deception. In other words, I think it's for everyone. So I think what's interesting in writing about this book is I get everyone's stories, and it is amazing how many people, including very smart and sophisticated people, have been the subject of intimate deception. If you want to learn more, both about sort of half the book is about intimate deception itself, and then half is about how the law responds, basically how the law denies remedies for it.
There are two ladies in this world who don't want to have anything to do with me. Miss maybe wouldn't too, but there's two specifically that I want to and both of them don't want to have anything to do with me because I knew both of their husbands. Both of their husbands were deceiving them. And because I was a friend, they assumed that I was in on it, and I was not.
You were in on it.
I was not. And in fact, both of them are in New York, and I'm in Florida, and I really wasn't even in touch with both of them. But in both ladies' cases, they don't want to have anything to do with me. It's kind of hurtful. Is that a good word, Robin? Where you used to have a friend, and no longer you can't even send a Christmas card anymore. And it's kind of crazy. I'm like a collateral damage.
Yeah.
Intimate deception can cause waves of injury. So to other relationships. So for instance, say a man, he's deceiving his wife to conceal he's had a child with another woman. So that's deception to the wife, but also that man is likely to spend very little time with the new baby because anytime he spends, the secret could get out. If he has other children, the half siblings are likely to spend little time to each other. So one thing that's sad about intimate deception is it's not just the immediate target, it's these collateral consequences going forward.
Can you imagine if you couldn't hide anything from anybody? I mean, I wonder how people would treat each other.
Right. I mean, and again, I understand, as I say in the book, like there is deception that is to spare people's feelings, but the only thing I'll say is that I'm not interested in deception where the deceived person agrees, yes, that spared my feelings, that made everything better. Deceivers, though, tend to tell themselves, oh, she's better off not knowing. Even about that, and it is the case that people want to believe, in fidelity and that you're not robbing me blind, et cetera, et cetera. That can make you happy in the short term. But it's an easy story for a deceiver to tell. In general, people want to know these big things. Yes, it would be a different world if you couldn't deceive, and some people would have many fewer dates.
And then you have the people that abuse physically other people, and then those people that are abused are afraid to come forward and tell because they've been threatened.
Right. So one thing that's interesting is intimate deception is very intertwined with domestic violence in both ways. So first, domestic batterers, of course, are lying all the time. That's part of the abuse. They're lying all the time. But also, sometimes intimate deception comes out of powerlessness. So people who are subject to domestic violence often deceive in return. So the batterer is trying to get her pregnant against her will. She can't just say no because he's going to beat her up. So she secretly takes birth control, right?
Yes.
Or outside of the domestic violence, but also like the powerless. I have examples, women, stay-at-home wives, their husbands won't give them any money.
Exactly.
You don't really have a legal right to get cash from your spouse while you're married. You have to get divorced. So these women, they don't want to get divorced for a variety of reasons. So they're deceiving to get cash. They're inflating what the grocery bill is. They're selling, spare items. So deception can also be motivated by powerlessness, Another reason why we should try to help people in these situations.
You have really, it's borderline psychology, the book you've written, and it's such a fascinating topic. I also want to compliment you on bringing something to this show that we've never really discussed before. And we've done this 17 years, so thank you for doing that, Jill.
Thank you.
Let's see. The book is doing really well on Amazon. I would like to retell the title. It's Intimate Lies and the Law. Jill, do you have a website other than Amazon that you'd like to tell us about?
Yep, my website, which has all the details about the book, is jillhasday.com. So that's JILLHAS as in Sam, D as in David, AY.com.
And if there's a hope for this, I'm hoping that people who are being deceived and at a loss because of that deceit, whether it's a financial loss or something else, hopefully the book gives them some guidance to figure out a way to maybe make things good, or at least as good as possible.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you read the book, you will see that, one, you're not alone, and two, you're not to blame.
I love that.
Well, that is an important thing. Even if you don't get any monetary payback, at least if you realize that you are not to blame.
You're not to blame. Because I think, and it's interesting, I have a number of women. So, for instance, there's this one woman, she discovers her husband is a deceptive bigamist. He has a wife she doesn't know about.
Oh, my gosh.
She says, I know, there's a lot of, if you're a novelist looking for a plot, you can read this book. But, and she says, on top of, he's basically squandered all her money, and she's lost her husband, and she's raising these kids. Everyone thinks I'm an idiot,
Yeah,
and you just should. It doesn't matter how smart you are, how sophisticated you are. People can be fooled, So you shouldn't be blaming yourself.
We got to love each other. We can't pretend to love each other. Jill, thank you for what you're doing. I think you're making the world a better place with this book. So thank you for that.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
And I'm not lying to you. I'm not deceiving you. I really.
So that's the kind of deception I like. So.
I really. All right. Thank you so much. We will be right back.
With a graduate degree in management and leadership from Webster University,